You want to know the weirdest thing about this Shockwave? After owning him for a month, I still don't know if I like him or not. From Transformers Dark of the Moon, this is the MechTech Voyager Shockwave. And I think it's fair to say he is someone who would have been incredible when he came out in 2011, but hasn't aged particularly well. I think there's a reason why so many people have really gravitated towards the Studio Series Leader Class Shockwave. It's because, as great as this guy is, he is rough in some very specific ways. It also doesn't have the charm of a Cybertron or an Energon figure to where those shortcomings can be excused with age because, well, this guy's a lot newer than them and still feels a little bit limited. A big problem I'm having is just trying to figure out if I like the design or not. I mentioned in the Mini Toys of Shockwave, I go back and forth on the Dark of the Moon design for him. I think it's one of the better of the original Bayverse trilogy designs. I still don't know if it's good or not. This is a very messy Shockwave, a very bulbous Shockwave, a very weirdly thin Shockwave in profile. It's so interesting because Starscream has the joke of being a Dorito, but I mean, doop, super flat. This is a Dorito boy. This is a purple Dorito boy with one eye, and if it wasn't for that head, I don't even know if I could really tell this was Shockwave, but then again, it's kind of par for the course when it comes to the Bayverse designs. The weird thing is, yeah, I don't like the aesthetics, but the playability of the toy really saves it in so many ways. So just going through the figure, right, you should know, these are accessories. So you can take off the blade, it takes a little bit of doing, but you can take off the turret, you can even take off the gun hose, and all of those can be switched around and modified, so you have a lot of options with this guy. But then just looking at the base body, you have a ball joint at the head that doesn't get a lot of up and down. Also, some of the best light piping I've ever seen on a figure. Look at how well the light comes through. You have a good swivel here in the shoulder, as well as a hinge up and down, effectively giving you a very, very strange universal. You have an upper arm cut, a good single joint elbow, and a wrist hinge. Of course, this does mean that Shockwave is gorilla-armed, but he can also beckon like a chimp. He has nothing in the waist, but he does have universal hips, with a ratchet, mind you, and an upper leg cut, and a very good double-jointed knee. Insane posability, and you can go back and forth at the foot, and there is a heel spur that also goes back and forth. So, you can get this guy looking so good and so manic. You can make it look like he's just like trying to say, come on, come on! It doesn't really feel like Shockwave, but what it feels like is a really fun toy. And then there's his big cannon, and this is his MechTech weapon. So check this out, right? You take this part in the back, flip it forward, and you can lock it in place. He has this monster gun arm. And it's not like it's super fun to swap this around or anything, but again, options. And it can go on either arm. So let me actually put it back on his arm now. I prefer to put it here on that arm. And then you have the gun hose. Gun hose can go anywhere you want, but it's supposed to go, in theory at least, here. And then have it twist around the back. And then you also have the blade, which you can also put into the big gun or on the other arm, but you can just give him like one ultra mega death cannon arm. And it looks fun and good. Like, Shockwave is giving you so much to play with here in terms of just how to even pose him. And I do love the detail that his hand can, like, very easily and very organically fold back, so you can give Shockwave the big gun hand if you want it, or he could just have two hands and the big gun, like a Megatron, or he could just have no gun at all and just be a naked boy. Boop. Naked Shockwave. Oh, cover your shame, Shockwave. There you go. Don't get me wrong, by default, he has to have a spot in the Parliament of Shockwave, but, well, he's definitely not like a voice at the table or anything. He might be like, the gardener. Maybe a security officer. Tell you what, he can even be a chair for whenever Alternator Shockblast's throne is in the shop. You're going up in the world, Dark of the Moon MechTech Shockwave. Pretty soon, they might even consider you an equal. I think it kind of goes without saying, I do think that out of all the Shockwaves we've looked at for Sunday Shockwave, this is my least favorite one, but he's still a ton of fun. He's still a really fun figure. It's not his fault that he can't measure up against the best Energon toy, one of the best Prime toys, the best Alternator, and one of the best Legends class figures of all time. It's not his fault that the rest of his family is an A++ and he's just an A+. That's not his fault. I still don't like him as much. Unless, of course, he's the chosen one of Shockwaves. Can he hold the Combiner Wars Shockwave gun mode? Give it a go, Shockwave. Can you do it, bud? He cannot. I'm afraid our search continues. And this guy, turns out he's just as smelly a loser as we thought. Okay, so he's a fun robot who doesn't look all that good. Maybe he can be a really fun tank. That was one of the best movie transformations I've ever dealt with. There were so many great decisions made. There were so many points where I found a tab or a lock-in point, and I was like, oh my god. I didn't even realize that that was a tab or a lock-in point. It was so well hidden within the sculpting of the figure. This was a tour de force of transformation. I just hate that it doesn't really turn into anything. I mean, there's treads here and wheels. I do like the look of this in some respects. I like how it's just a big monster space tank. I like the gun. I really love the front here, where you can see Shockwave's eye just kind of poking out the front a little bit from certain angles. I like the tank. It's just, I mean, it's not much of anything, is it? It looks like a really malformed hamburger patty. It's a great transformation. The best transformation I've ever seen out of any of these Shockwaves. But it's a so-so tank mode, and a fun robot mode that has some pretty weird omissions. And overall, it just leads me to say Shockwave is incredibly fun. When it's in hand, it's a blast. But for photos and putting it on a shelf, for once, this is a Transformer that suffers in presentation, but excels in playability. Usually it's the other way around with Transformers. So, hey, at least you're a unique Shockwave. This Shockwave is a walking paradox. He doesn't look good, in some extent he doesn't feel good, and yet, in hand, he is so much fun to pose, he has a great transformation, his weapon's good, he feels weighty, he has great joints, wonderful articulation, his tolerances are all pitch perfect all these years later even. It's a Shockwave that I would heavily recommend if you enjoy playing with your figures. If you like transformations, if you like posability, if you like finding fun little stances or poses to put your toys into, this guy is perfect, especially if you want to use him for more comical poses. There is so much untapped potential to make good, kind of meme-esque photos with this guy. That said, he's not a wonderful presentation. He's going to look a little bit rough on a shelf, and even if you have a dedicated movie shelf, I don't know how well he blends in with, say, Revenge of the Fallen toys or Movie 1 toys. He would look good with Dark of the Moon toys, but at the same time, Dark of the Moon toys, just generally speaking, also have a little bit of issue with presentation. He is an immensely fun figure to play with, and I heavily recommend him as a Shockwave to play with. He's not going to be that eye-catching, show-stopping centerpiece to a shelf the way other Shockwaves have been on Sunday Shockwave before. But hey, you've been promoted to head of security, friend. Now get to work.